My name is Bill Jones. I'm with recapturefederalism.com and operationofficialmisconduct.com. Talk today, a little podcast tutorial about Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and the letter from Birmingham Jail. As you can see on the screen, this particular one is the first version. You always want to get the first version of that. This particular one is the first version copy, which is public. It's in the public domain, and there's a whole thing why it is. Back in the 60s, when this is from April of 63, you had to be pretty specific when something was published. Not like it is now. Well, anybody can say anything. Just put a copyright mark on it. You can say anything you want, and it's copyright protected. Back in that time, you had to be pretty specific. They didn't do it right away. The family, the King family, as far as I know, has never pursued it. In fact, they've waived any claim to it on the first version. Then there's other people who've made changes, like I'm doing right now. Talk about it, what have you. And technically it goes onto my site. My site is copyright protected also. Even though talking about something like this, I don't get too concerned about it. But this particular one comes from the Research and Education Institute at Stanford. And it's pretty well done on this. Now I suppose there are other things that are well done also. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. I was throw the junior in there. There might be some confusion. His father, Senior, was also a traditional Christian minister. Junior, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., was fourth generation preacher man, and a very good one. We all know recently celebrated. They didn't say a word about this letter earlier in the year. And I think this is maybe his best work, even better than his speeches and the Dream speech. He was on a roll in 63. And, of course, they had a big celebration, and the people on the left wing made a big deal, and rightfully so as far as the speech goes. But what do they say about it? They want to say, well, this is what he intended. This is what he really meant. And if he were here today, that's a bunch of malarkey. Because if you really want to know what he was thinking in that time frame, that period, from April of 1963, he was thrown in the Birmingham Jail for demonstrating, and he was put in there. And you'll notice that it's written to my dear fellow clergymen. He was responding to an editorial that was in the paper in Birmingham. They considered, they wish he'd tone down his thing, stay in Atlanta, and he was an outsider, he was an agitator, he was causing problems. And he responded. He wrote this letter. It is long. It's 48 paragraphs long. Beautiful, wonderful reading. If you got the time to do that, and I suggest you make the time to do it. You really want to know what he was thinking? It tells you all right in here what he was thinking. And there's some great stuff in here. About the, let's see, the third paragraph down, let me just give you an idea what the sense was. And there's famous quotes is in this paragraph. And, and next paragraph, I believe. But here, this one here gives you flavor. But more basically, I am in Birmingham because injustice is here. Just as the prophets of the 8th century BC left their villages and carried their "Thus saith the Lord" far beyond the boundaries of their hometowns, and just as the Apostle Paul left his village of Tarsa and carried the gospel of Jesus Christ to the far corners of the Greco-Roman world, so I am compelled to carry the gospel of freedom beyond my own hometown. Like Paul, I must constantly respond to the Macedonian call for aid. heavy duty in the religion. And here he was, a public man demonstrating nonviolent civil disobedience. He was involved with what was happening around him and in state and injustice. And the people who were going to tell you all about what he was thinking here 50 years later, these are the same people who said separation of church and state. There's no separation of church and state here with Martin Luther King Jr., and there shouldn't be. We have in the Constitution a religion test, and you're not supposed to be excluded, and it isn't mandatory that you belong to any particular religion or any religion at all, and that's what the religion test is. But there's those who have some sort of moral code other than the Judeo-Christian code. They want to exclude, 220 million Christians, 5.5 million Jews who practice the Judaism. Then the next paragraph, this is where the famous quote is. Moreover, I am cognizant of the interrelatedness of all communities and states. I cannot sit idly by in Atlanta and not be concerned about what happens in Birmingham. Here's the famous quote. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And how much injustice? He goes through, if you read this, about unjust laws and what is legal and what is illegal and at different times. We may go through some of that. A couple of paragraphs down, very significant here. This is a great lesson. In any nonviolent campaign, there are 4 basic steps. This is a great lesson for people today who want to combat the injustices and the unjust laws that we have today that are emanating from the Congress and the executive branch and the supreme puppets. This is what you want to do. You can whine and cry and talk all you want, which is good too. It's a good event. But you need to take action. You need to do something. You need to correct things. You need to correct the injustices. That's what Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was doing, and he came up with these, and I don't know whether they were original to him or not, but he sure did spell it out in this letter. In any nonviolent campaign, there are 4 basic steps. Collection of the facts to determine whether injustices exist. 2, negotiation. 3, self-purification. And 4, direct action. Now, if I go farther down, the 4 steps that he did, they tried negotiating down there in Birmingham, didn't do too good. And then they got into some self-purification, and what that amounted to. They told him, you're going to be beat. They're going to have the dogs on you. They're not going to be very nice. They're going to throw you in jail, which they did to many of them, including Dr. King. That's your self-purification. You better be turning the other cheek. This idea, this Christian idea of turning the other cheek, that's what this is from. You notice he isn't condemning anybody when he's talking about this stuff. No, he's saying, no, I'm standing up. I'm going into that a little bit later. But Notice down near the bottom of this paragraph that we're talking about. These are hard, brutal facts of the case. On the basis of these conditions, Negro leaders sought to negotiate with the city fathers, but the latter consistently refused to engage in good faith negotiation. Well, we hear about that today, don't we? We've got a president of the White House. He don't negotiate. You do it my way or the highway. He's just like old Bull Connor down there in Birmingham and the other white segregationist. Yeah, we ain't negotiating. And you don't be demonstrating in our town, 'cause we're gonna stick the dogs on you, the water hoses. We're gonna violate your basic human rights. Yep. Several paragraphs later, down from what I had just talked about, there's these two paragraphs. Very interesting. Of course, there is nothing new about this kind of civil disobedience. It was evidenced sublimely in the refusal of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to obey the laws of Nebuchadnezzar, on the ground that a higher moral law was at stake. A little side note right here. That's Daniel 3. If you ever want to read something, you read the whole chapter of Daniel 3. They stood up. They didn't condemn anybody. They didn't call anybody names. But they refused to obey the laws of Nebuchadnezzar. King Nebuchadnezzar put himself in front of God. Sort of like a political party supremacist put themselves in front of God. That's why separation of church and state, that's why they wouldn't allow Dr. King to be just saying what he's saying here. They'd have him back in jail nowadays. Same thing. But Daniel 3, give that a read. It's a wonderful thing to read that whole chapter. And then he continues on. It was practiced superbly by the early Christians who were willing to face hungry lions and excruciating pain of chopping blocks rather than submit to certain unjust laws of the Roman Empire. To a degree, academic freedom is a reality today because of Socrates practiced civil disobedience. In our own nation, the Boston Tea Party represented a massive act of civil disobedience. And talking about the Boston Tea Party, of course you got the Tea Party today, which is based off their philosophy and their demonstration in civil disobedience a couple hundred years ago. That's why I mentioned the first version of this letter, because some of the later, the Tea Party reference is taken out of there. Oh, them present-day Democrats, they don't want to be anything related to Tea Party, Boston Tea Party, then or now. Because you see, if they have this in here, there's a recognition of the validity of the principles of the original Boston Tea Party and its relevance today. We'll continue on to the next paragraph. We should never forget that everything Adolf Hitler did in Germany was legal, and everything the Hungarian freedom fighters did in Hungary was illegal. It was illegal to aid and comfort a Jew in Hitler's Germany. Even so, I am sure that, had I lived in Germany at the time, I would have aided and comforted my Jewish brothers. Today, I lived in a communist... If today I lived in a communist country where certain principles dear to the Christian faith are suppressed, I would openly advocate disobeying that country's anti-religious laws. Interesting paragraph now, isn't it, about communism. That's from 1963. It was relevant then because it made reference to the Hungarian Revolution. That was in late 1956. That's just 6.5 years earlier from when King is writing this. And it's relevant today. I'm going to be going through, talking about communism, I'm going to be going through another podcast here within the next week, talking about communism and its relevance to the party supremacist. Same principles go along with that. But I guess we'll just sign off for today and talk about some other things later on. Everything that has happened in the past, it's part of history. Don't forget that history. They don't completely repeat themselves, but there's a lot of familiarities between them, a lot of associations, especially when you're talking about moral codes and different moral codes. Somehow the old moral code just suddenly disappears because somebody's got a hair up their butt, you know. They want to follow a different moral code. They want to force other people to do it through oppression and evil.